Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izo, and coming up in this edition, you know what they say, fourth time's a charm. Israel is heading to yet another election, and it could be even messier than the last one. Peace between Israel and Morocco takes off with the first direct commercial flight from Tel Aviv to Rabat. And ho, 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 Christmas is almost here. Israelis and Palestinians are spreading the holiday cheer. Believe it or not, Israel is heading to yet another election, a fourth in less than 2 years. The Knesset automatically dissolving itself after failing to agree on a budget by the midnight Tuesday deadline. The vote will be held on March 23rd of next year. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blamed the deadlock on infighting within Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party, while the alternative Prime Minister Gantz put the onus on Netanyahu's corruption charges. Take a listen to the official announcement from Knesset Speaker Yariv Levin.
אני מוכרח לומר שלצערי הרב לא עלה בידינו כולנו למצוא מספיק מן המשותף כדי להימנע מסבב בחירות נוסף וכדי לאפשר לכנסת ה-23 ולחבריה לממש במלואו את המנדט שניתן לנו. אנחנו יוצאים כולנו למערכת בחירות לא פשוטה. אני קורא מכאן לכל אחת ואחד מאיתנו ולכל אחת ואחד מאזרחי ישראל להימנע מלהחריף את המתחים ולעשות כל שניתן כדי שמערכת הבחירות תתנהל ותסתיים באופן מסודר וללא גילויי אלימות.
Now let's go straight to the source and hear from Michal Kotler-Wunsch, a member of Knesset from the Blue and White Party. Thank you, Michal, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I have to start by asking, how on earth did we get here? Gantz and Netanyahu are blaming each other after 3 elections that all ended in deadlock. Why should anyone believe that this one will be any different?
That is such a good question. It's where we return to the sovereign, to the Israeli public, to enable us to create a functional government. After having created a unity government, which I'll say, the coalition agreement was really just a technical unity. I had hoped for much, much more, that we would be able to embark in a much more holistic way to what unity actually means, in the sense of, truth and reconciliation, that the internal resiliency of the Israeli societal fabric so much needs. But the coalition agreement was not upheld. So all the symptoms, including the budget, which just last week, we were told by Nigid Bank Israel, a budget is compulsory. It is the work plan with which the government needs to function. And it didn't take him, Amir Yaron, to tell us that. It is very clear that in order to create solutions in the face of the most difficult crisis, economic and health and societal crisis that Israel is facing, we need a budget. But the budget is just one symptom. There is legislation that is stuck, that is not advanced. For the improvement for the sake of all Olim, all Israeli citizens, very important legislation, stuck. More dysfunctionality, the inability to appoint very important appointees that are imperative for stability at a time of instability and always, whether it's police chief and so forth. So that dysfunctionality actually made it very clear that even the technical unity hasn't succeeded. And in that sense, we have no choice but to return to the sovereign, i.e. the people, to receive their vote and hopefully create a much more functioning government that can lead the country forward out of this crisis.
Michal, we are clearly in the middle of what might be the worst phase yet of a global pandemic. Our economy is on the brink of collapse. How can Israel afford this right now?
So as I said, it is the very reason that I supported entering the unity government is this crisis. At the time, we didn't know the extent of COVID-19 and how tremendous the impact would be on every level of society, economically, obviously health, and beyond. And how can it, I would rephrase it and say, we're basically forced to choose between 2 bad options. One bad option is election. A much worse option at this time. And it's all about responsibility. So the same responsibility that guided me in supporting this unity government has to still guide me. And that responsibility is fully indicative that a non-functional or a dysfunctional government is much worse than an election at this time? I would flip the question and say, how can we not have a functioning government at this time in order to be able to extract the state of Israel, not only from this global pandemic, but really utilize and identify the opportunities alongside the tremendous challenges and propel Israel into its next 72 years in those long-term plans I was referring to, in holistic policy, in comprehensive and available guidelines for the state of Israel, for all of its ministries. And for that, you need a functioning government.
Okay, and I'm curious what your prediction is of what the election outcome might be.
So I'll tell you, I think we're in a process. I think the state of Israel, the miracle that is the state of Israel, the 72-year-old miracle that is the state of Israel, is in a process, in a democratic process, and in a process of identifying its own identity, I would say as Jewish and democratic, as based on the Declaration of Independence, upon which indigenous peoples returned to its ancestral homeland, promising equality to all of its minorities and citizens. All of that has to be looked at, and very many issues that actually have to be dealt with, which we have left sort of by the sidelines. I would say the urgent that has always cast aside the importance, whether it's issues of religion and state, or as I said, Jewish and democratic and what that means, and good governance and what that looks like, transparent long-term plans that I just spoke about, even and I say this not personally and not politically, but term limitations as part of good governance. These are issues that the 72-year-old state of Israel, young and old, has to begin looking at. That is what looks into the future. And so saying that we are in that process, as we are, it's hard to tell what the very immediate next step will be. And blue and white was surely a part of that process. But we are really in a constant motion, I hope, forward, and I'm a very hopeful person. So I hope we're in motion forward towards, resolving many of those issues. And if I say the founding fathers and mothers of this country laid down the physical infrastructure, it is our turn, our generation, that needs to lay the next level, the next tier of the infrastructure of this country for the next 72 years to be ensured and to be, successful.
Well, we'll have to wait until March to find out. Michal Kotler-Wunsch, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, on top of heading to a fourth election, Israel is also marking another milestone, adding a fourth nation to the U.S.-brokered Abraham Accords after the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan. The first ever direct commercial flight landing in Rabat from Tel Aviv on Tuesday, with an Israeli delegation on board accompanied by Jared Kushner. Chana Rifkin's report.
Israel and Morocco agreed to open diplomatic missions in Tel Aviv and Rabat, days after announcing this would be the fourth deal of the U.S.-brokered Abraham Accords.
So what's next? After the agreements are signed today and the memos of understanding, I will probably be down in the southern provinces opening our consulate. And then I think over the coming months, you can look for more agreements between Israel and our partners, coming with innovation and perhaps technology, matching it with Morocco's entrepreneurship. We're very excited about what can be coming.
2 weeks ago, outgoing U.S. President Trump announced that Israel and Morocco have agreed to full diplomatic ties. The deal in exchange for U.S. recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara, despite international backlash.
I think this is an historic event. Both the announcement of the re-establishment of relations between Morocco and Israel, and the visit of the first formal official delegation from Israel to Rabat. It's an historic day because it sends a message of hope both for the people of Morocco and the people of Israel and the entire region. A region that's has known too many wars and too many conflicts. We are now in an era that we are talking about peace and we are talking about hope.
Donald Trump's advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner arriving in Israel early Tuesday.
It's been an honor to be a part of it. I want to thank the team here for all their hard work. Hopefully this will be a successful flight. We have several agreements that we're looking to conclude on this.
Later, accompanying an Israeli delegation on the first ever direct commercial flight to Rabat. Officials say that the diplomatic missions expected to open in each country are just the beginning of diplomatic agreements between the countries.
العلاقات الدافية بين القصر الملكي والشعب المغربي عامة ويهود المغرب خاصة معروفة في كل أنحاء العالم. إنها ستشكل جسرا بين البلدين وركنا لبناء السلام بين الشعبين.
Chana Rifkin, ILTV.
And by the way, a fifth country could join the Abraham Accords soon, Indonesia. A U.S. administration official telling Bloomberg News that Trump is offering the Southeast Asian country $1 billion in exchange. While the U.S. and Israel have alluded to additional normalization deals, there has been no comment on this as of yet. Okay, U.S. Congress this week passed a historic legislation that will provide unprecedented levels of funding to peacebuilding and coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. The Nita M. Lawi Middle East Partnership for Peace Act is the result of over a decade of advocacy by the Alliance for Middle East Peace. The funding includes $250 million over 5 years. Now, for more on that and other Middle East stories, let's go live to Kevin Rachman. He's the U.S. Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thank you, Kevin, so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Sure. So tell me about this new funding. Why did it take so long to achieve? And what exactly kind of projects will this go towards?
So the new funding, the Nita M. Lowy Partnership for Peace Act, the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, has been a 10-year endeavor of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. When we were founded in 2006, we had this idea, looking at the field in Israel and in Palestine, of all these peace builders out there operating independently, but in small chunks, that they weren't able to really bring transformative change to the Israeli-Palestinian population. And how do you do that? And so we started looking around at other models to really examine what worked in the past. And we came on this idea of the International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace, which is modeled off of the International Fund for Ireland, which was in 1986. So we spent 10 years trying to convince Congress that this was a really good idea. And we started out, very small, getting through that idea that peace building is essential, that it is critical to making peace, that you have to build from the ground up using the grassroots. And eventually we started getting support. We started out with, Joe Crowley from New York, and eventually, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry from Nebraska took it and spearheaded it on. And he's a Republican, and partnered with Ms. Lowy, who is now retiring from New York. And the two of them really brought that to a head in 2018 when they introduced the first version of the bill, the Palestinian Peace Act. And then in 2019, when they introduced the last version, the Partnership for Peace Act. So it's really an exciting moment. This has been a long-term endeavor of ALMEP. And I think just to give some context of what this does, it's $50 million a year for 5 years. And just to give you some context of how much money is being spent on peace building in Israel and in Palestine right now by the United States, last year in the fiscal year 19 budget, only $5 million was spent in Israel and Palestine when it came to peace building activities. This would bring unprecedented resources to the region to do not only the peace building and reconciliation work that needs to be occurring, but also economic development in the West Bank and Gaza for Palestinians.
Okay, let's zoom out on the Middle East for a second. We just spoke about the new deal with Morocco. Now we're hearing about Indonesia. Might they be the next and perhaps last country to join the Abraham Accords?
So this is interesting because, Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country in the world. And it would make sense that the Trump administration would want to do this. I think the real concern is that this is an outgoing administration and that they are offering billions of dollars to normalize relationships and to create a relationship with Israel. And there isn't an indication from the Biden administration whether or not they would move forward with this or not. I think it would behoove folks to take a step back and in Indonesia to kind of see what will President-elect Biden say around this type of initiative. But I know there's an uncomfortability right now on Capitol Hill regarding this type of deal because it does seem to be using the DFC to incentivize political developments versus development initiatives.
Sure. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens, of course, when the Biden administration takes the White House. Kevin Rachman, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you.
The UAE and Morocco are taking over the headlines this week with new lockdown laws and new agreements forging. But in the background, Israel's ties with Bahrain continue to flourish. The deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan, was there last week looking for new opportunities for Israel to mark this new era in the Middle East. Now let's go live to Fleur, who just came back from Bahrain in light of Israel's new travel restrictions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely to be here.
So I know before this, you also spent time in the UAE and you created the Israel-UAE Business Council. What was the purpose of your trip, and do you have plans to create something similar in Bahrain?
So from the very beginning, you know, a lot of Emiratis and a lot of Israelis were extremely excited about the potential of peace. And not just the potential of peace in terms of, you know, the political leadership signing an agreement, but also the potential for peace in terms of what it could do for people, the mutual prosperity that it could bring. And what we found was that people were really excited about talking culture and business, etc., but they didn't have that infrastructure. And so what we wanted to do is build a platform and build the infrastructure for people to start talking to each other, for people to start doing business together, because we truly believe that when people do business together, this is when they build trust, they get to know each other's cultures. And so it was a very, very important part of the peace building. As you know, we have here a very different peace. We have a warm peace within our country for the first time ever. You know, we've had peace for decades with Jordan and Egypt, but ultimately it never really trickled down to people. And we are in an unprecedented moment in history. And so myself and my co-founder, Dorian Barak, who've been friends for many, many years, decided that we wanted to build the UAE Israel Business Council. He's a businessman who's been doing business in the region for about 10 years. And so he saw this coming. He's been telling me for about 2 years. This is the new frontier. And so we built this platform. We have over 3,000 people, and it's going very well. We provide a lot of value, a lot of content. We've put together some matches, some deals. And I went last week to Bahrain to see whether there is a similar desire over there to engage in business with Israel and to engage in a warm peace. And I really was very excited by what I found.
All right, well, on a slightly different note, I'm sure you are aware that yesterday the first direct commercial flight took off from Tel Aviv to Rabat in Morocco following the announcement that they would join the Abraham Accords. Now, I know you are of Moroccan descent, and I wonder how you felt reading about that.
Well, I think, you know, there's a lot of Moroccans in Israel. My mother's originally from Tangiers. I still have family in Morocco. My family have been doing business with Muslims in Tangiers, with Moroccans for many, many years. And so for me, this is really just an incredible moment where I could always go to Morocco because I've got British passport, but to go with my Israeli passport to Morocco, which is where my mother and my grandmother was born, I'm really thrilled and I can't wait to go. Maybe we'll create a Morocco-Israel Business Council. Who knows?
Well, when you do it, we will definitely interview you about it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We all knew it was only a matter of time, but it looks like Israel is heading to yet another lockdown. The coronavirus cabinet meeting today to discuss and likely disagree over a potential lockdown to curb the new infection rate surge that could be connected to a new COVID mutation. The Prime Minister is looking to have a 2 or 3 week closure approved, which would include a full shutdown of trade and the education system, a lot like the first lockdown back in March, and likely close the skies to air travel. Meanwhile, vaccine manufacturers, both Pfizer and Moderna, say they are currently testing their formulas for effectiveness against the new strain, but so far no results. Meanwhile, Israelis who are entering the country now are being transported to mandatory corona hotels, which went into effect this afternoon. Here are the latest figures as the country continues to roll out its vaccination campaign. Yesterday, Israel's health ministry recorded 3,753 new cases. There are 156 Israelis in critical condition, including 116 on ventilators, and the death toll is 3,136. For more, visit our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, and let us know what you think of our new design. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for all the daily updates. Okay, moving on now. Some of the world's biggest tech companies are in a legal battle against an Israeli software company. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Cisco, and Dell are suing the NSO Group for having what they call powerful and dangerous technology. Facebook launched the complaint last year in a U.S. court, claiming the company hacked accounts through its platforms, mostly of government officials, journalists, and activists. This week, a cybersecurity watchdog reporting that dozens of journalists working for the Qatari-funded Al Jazeera were targeted, an attack most likely linked to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Let's find out more from the CEO of Israel's Internet Association, Yoram HaKohen. Thank you, Yoram, for joining us.
You're welcome.
So, what happened here, Yoram? If Israel is really helping the Saudis with tracking journalists, could this maybe lead to a human rights issue? Is it possible that the Saudis and Emiratis were using it to track journalists and officials without the NSO group even knowing about it?
First of all, there's no question that there is a human rights issue. And the whole issue of developing cyber attack tools is a matter of, in most of the cases of human rights, because you're entering into cellular phones or computers of civilians, or it may be even, it may be army officials and government officials of the other side. I would not say that Israel is doing that. It's an Israeli company. It is true that this company has a license to export those technologies according to the Israeli exporting rules. And in that sense, I assume that the company, that NSO, needs to get an approval from the Israeli Ministry of Defense for exporting their tools and services. And especially in that case, for countries or states that Israel at that time didn't have any diplomatic relations with.
Yoram HaKohen, thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
Thank you.
Police clashed with ultra-Orthodox Jews on Tuesday in Jerusalem as a demonstration was held to protest the detention of a 20-year-old after he rejected army conscription. Hundreds gathered near the capital city's central bus station, police closing the road and shooting water cannons at protesters. While some from the ultra-Orthodox community do serve in the military, many generally believe that their time should be spent studying Jewish religious law and that the military would prevent that or postpone it. Under current Israeli law, Jews educated at yeshivas are exempt from drafting to the army. Well, Christmas Eve is tomorrow night, and holiday cheer is quickly spreading around the Holy Land. Each year, Palestinian Christian Issa Kassisia tours around the old city of Jerusalem, handing out goodies provided by the city's municipality to Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. Now he has a new addition to his costume, a mask, of course.
I think everybody could use a little extra celebration this year. So we brought our whole family to receive this amazing gift of a tree, and we're looking forward to celebrating together.
Merry Christmas!
And in Tel Aviv, a slightly different scene, and maybe a place you'd least expect to see a character normally in a snowy climate. A handful of locals dressed up and attended a Santa beach volleyball match organized by the municipality to spread the holiday spirit.
This year, the Christmas around the world is a little different, a little bit sad sometimes, but here in Tel Aviv, we decided to do it a party. Party! Woo!
Merry Christmas to all those celebrating. All right, it's time to take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight will be partly cloudy and lows falling to about 52 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect cloudy skies with a high of an average around 63 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 degrees Celsius. And just before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. That is Israel's star basketball player, Denny Avdia, who was recently drafted to the Washington Wizards, singing his teammate and friend happy birthday in Hebrew. All of Israel was really excited to see that video on social media. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.23 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For more news, visit the new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and let us know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates. I'm Laura Nizo. Thanks as always for watching.